Hello, this webcast deals with the social characteristics of the colonies. The three regions we're going to be talking about are New England, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. And we want to have a sense of what their different social characteristics were. So we want to wonder a little bit about what social characteristics are. When we talk about that, we're talking about things like language, so the actual dialect or literally the language that they spoke. For example, in the middle colonies, there was a lot of French and German and Dutch, but also the clothing they wore, the way that society related to each other, and the food they ate, really everything that has to do with things that we consider to be social. The three regions, again, just like any time we've been talking about the regions, we begin with the north, and then we'll deal with the middle and the southern. In the northern colonies, it was all about religion. So if you had a high level of standing in the church, then you had a high level of standing in society. So the elders in the church were also the elders in terms of society. If you were a leader of the church, you were a leader within government, and you were a leader within society. Now, it was a really rigid social structure, so there was no moving up and down, there was no changing at all. The Puritans were very, very intense about how they expected people to behave. So, for example, children could be taken away from their families if they didn't behave appropriately. You could be placed in stocks, meaning like your head would be put in a stock out in the middle of the town square if you didn't act appropriately. And the Puritans, I mean, these are the same group of people that outlawed carbonated beverages. They shut down the Globe Theater. They were all about purifying the Church of England. That's why they call themselves Puritans. And their society kind of followed that idea. There was a group of people known as dissenters who were tired with this rigid social structure, and they left, and here you kind of see it there. They left from Massachusetts and they went to Rhode Island. That was Roger Williams, or there's a woman by the name of Anne Hutchinson who was like Williams. These were dissenters who didn't like what the Puritans were doing and they wanted to get out. Shift down to the middle colonies, and in the middle colonies you have a much more diverse group of people and a much less rigid social structure. So there was an opportunity to move up and down kind of the social ladder. There was a large middle class because of all of the tradespeople in the middle colonies. There was a lot of diverse different religions because you have Jews and Huguenots. Huguenots, again, a sort of fancy word for French Protestants. There were Catholics. There were Presbyterians. So lots of different people, lots of different religions, a lot of people living together and essentially getting along. And so you could move up the ladder, you could move down the ladder. There was a lot of chance to improve your social position, but by the same token, you could also kind of lose your social position. You could move down the social ladder just as well. The middle colonies, we often will focus on Pennsylvania, where the Quakers were. The Quakers embraced all people, so women, Native Americans. Women were given the right to vote very early on. The Quakers were some of the earliest abolitionists because they were against slavery. If you look at New York, originally established by the Dutch, originally called New Amsterdam, this was a place where trade was central, and if you were a really good trader, then you were going to go to the highest levels of society. Now that is very different from southern colonies, where your social position was determined by how much land you owned. And the people who had the most land were the people who traced their descendants back to the Cavaliers, those early Cavaliers who were given all of the very good land right on the sort of coastal areas. Now you had a lot of indentured servants who came in early, and when they had served their 5 to 7 year indenture, they would sort of move off in search of land, and many of them ended up in the Appalachian foothills, in the mountains. There was a rigid social caste system in the South. If you were a member of the landed gentry, the group who had lots of land, you did not marry someone who was a former indentured servant or someone who came from a lower class. Now, those landed gentry, the rich sort of former Cavaliers, big landowners, big plantations, and so forth, they controlled the House of Burgesses. So there was a close connection between your social status and your influence on the political sort of system within Virginia. Now, the indentured servants, they made up kind of a class of their own, and they ended up going out to the western portion of the state, what after the Civil War will become West Virginia, and they very much create their own culture. They had their own economy there as well. They were hunters, and they did a lot of trading and maybe some subsistence farming, which was very different from the lowlands kind of along the coast of Virginia, where it was cash crops, big plantations, and so forth. All right.